March 17, 1987. The fluorescent lights of Walmart hummed overhead in Fairfax, Virginia, casting their pale glow across rows of discount merchandise and shoppers pushing oversized carts. 23-year-old cashier Jennifer Martinez never imagined that her Tuesday evening shift would intersect with one of the most sophisticated espionage operations of the Cold War. She believed her biggest challenge that night would be handling the rush of customers stocking up before a predicted snowstorm. How spectacularly wrong she was about to be proven. Within hours, a seemingly routine transaction involving purchased items and an unusual credit card would set in motion a chain of events that would expose a Soviet intelligence operation spanning more than a decade, revealing how even the smallest details could unravel carefully constructed identities. But before we dive into this story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so we can bring you the most gripping Cold War and espionage stories every day. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support us. Jennifer had been working at the Walmart on Lee Highway for 18 months, a job she took to help pay for community college classes. She was studying criminal justice, dreaming of one day joining the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Her professors often praised her attention to detail and remarkable memory for faces and patterns. These qualities, which made her an exceptional student, were about to prove invaluable in ways she could never have anticipated. The store was moderately busy that evening, with customers trickling in steadily, but not overwhelming the checkout lanes. Jennifer worked Register 7, positioned near the main entrance where she could see people coming and going. She had developed a friendly rapport with many regular customers, learning their names and preferences, sometimes chatting about their families or weekend plans. At approximately 7:45, a man approached her register with a shopping cart containing what appeared to be ordinary household items. Laundry detergent, canned goods, bread, milk, batteries, and a few magazines. Nothing remarkable. The customer himself seemed equally unremarkable. Middle-aged, perhaps in his late 40s, with thinning brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a navy blue windbreaker and khaki pants, the uniform of suburban invisibility. His demeanor was polite but distant, offering a brief smile as Jennifer began scanning his items. What Jennifer noticed first was not anything obviously suspicious. It was something subtle, something that tickled at the edge of her awareness like a word on the tip of her tongue. The man spoke perfect English, with what might have been a slight Midwestern accent, asking about the weather forecast and mentioning that he needed to stock up before the storm hit. His words were appropriate, his tone conversational, but there was something in the cadence, a microscopic hesitation before certain words, that struck Jennifer as slightly unusual. As she continued scanning items, her training in observation kicked in almost unconsciously. She noticed his hands, which were well maintained, but showed calluses in unusual places. Not the typical wear pattern of someone who worked with tools or did manual labor. His watch was a Timex, inexpensive and common, but worn on his right wrist, despite appearing to be right-handed based on how he reached for his wallet. Small details, perhaps meaningless, but they accumulated in Jennifer's mind like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't yet realized she was assembling. The total came to $63.47. The man reached into his wallet and produced a Visa credit card, sliding it across the counter. Jennifer took the card and glanced at it automatically, a habit developed from countless transactions. The name embossed on the card read David Williamson. She swiped it through the credit card machine, an early electronic system that Walmart had recently installed in their stores. The card reader made its typical mechanical sounds, processing the transaction. Jennifer waited for the approval code, but instead the machine displayed a message requesting additional verification. This wasn't uncommon. Sometimes cards were flagged for various reasons: security precautions, unusual spending patterns, or simple technical glitches. Jennifer followed the standard procedure, picking up the phone to call the authorization center. While she waited on hold, she made small talk with the customer, apologizing for the delay. He seemed unconcerned, patient, commenting that these new electronic systems sometimes had growing pains. His response was perfectly reasonable, his demeanor unchanged. Yet something continued to nag at Jennifer's consciousness. The authorization representative came on the line, asking Jennifer to verify certain information from the card: account number, expiration date, the name on the card. Jennifer read off the details, and the representative asked her to hold for a moment. The wait stretched longer than usual, maybe 2 minutes, then 3. The customer, David Williamson, shifted his weight slightly, still patient, but beginning to show the first signs of mild impatience that any shopper might display during an unexplained delay. Then the authorization representative returned to the line with an unusual request. Could Jennifer describe the customer who was attempting to use the card? This was highly irregular. In her 18 months at Walmart, Jennifer had never been asked such a question during a routine transaction verification. Her pulse quickened slightly, though she kept her expression neutral, professional. She described the man: middle-aged, brown hair, glasses, blue windbreaker. The representative asked her to hold once more. Jennifer's mind raced. She had studied enough criminal justice to know that credit card fraud was common, but this situation felt different. The man showed no signs of nervousness that might indicate he was using a stolen card. He wasn't trying to rush the transaction or become argumentative. He simply waited, occasionally glancing toward the store entrance where snow had begun to fall, visible through the glass doors. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only another minute, the authorization representative returned with clear instructions. Jennifer was to approve the transaction and allow the customer to leave with his purchases. However, immediately after he departed, she was to call a specific phone number and ask for Agent Robert Thornton. The representative repeated the number twice, making sure Jennifer had written it down correctly. Jennifer's hands trembled slightly as she completed the transaction, though she managed to keep her voice steady. She told David Williamson that everything was approved, bagging his items carefully while her mind spun with questions. What was happening? Was this man using a stolen card? But if so, why had she been instructed to approve the purchase? And why contact an agent rather than regular security? The customer thanked her politely, collected his bags, and walked toward the exit with the unhurried gait of someone who had just completed an ordinary shopping trip. Jennifer watched him disappear into the snowy evening, then immediately turned to her supervisor and requested an emergency break. Her supervisor, seeing something urgent in Jennifer's expression, quickly agreed. In the manager's office, Jennifer dialed the number she had been given. A man answered on the second ring, his voice professional and alert. "This is Agent Thornton." Jennifer identified herself, explaining that she had just been told to call this number after processing a credit card transaction. The agent's response was immediate and intense. He asked her to describe everything she could remember about the customer: the items purchased, any vehicles in the parking lot, any companions. Jennifer provided every detail she could recall, drawing on her trained observation skills. Agent Thornton listened without interrupting, then asked Jennifer a question that sent chills down her spine. Did the customer speak with any kind of accent, even a very slight one? Jennifer hesitated, then described the subtle irregularities she had noticed in the man's speech patterns, the microscopic hesitations, the cadence that didn't quite match native speakers. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Agent Thornton asked Jennifer to stay exactly where she was. Federal agents would arrive within 30 minutes to speak with her. He emphasized that this was now a matter of national security and that she should discuss this with absolutely no one until the agents arrived. Jennifer agreed, her heart pounding. National security. Federal agents. What had she stumbled into? She sat in the manager's office, watching the clock tick forward with agonizing slowness. Her mind replayed the transaction over and over, analyzing every detail. The man's hands, his watch, his speech patterns, his remarkable composure during the delay. Nothing overtly wrong, yet everything somehow off-key, like a photograph that was almost perfect, except for one element that didn't quite belong. True to Agent Thornton's word, 2 Federal Bureau of Investigation agents arrived 28 minutes later. They showed their credentials to Jennifer and her manager, then requested a private room for the interview. For the next 90 minutes, they questioned Jennifer about every aspect of the transaction. They showed her photographs, asking if any depicted the customer she had served. Jennifer studied each image carefully, finally pointing to one that bore a strong resemblance, though the man in the photo appeared slightly younger, and his hair was darker. The agents exchanged meaningful glances. Agent Thornton, who had arrived with his partner Agent Sarah Chen, leaned forward. "Jennifer, what we're about to tell you is classified information. You will need to sign a non-disclosure agreement before we proceed. We're trusting you because you've already demonstrated exceptional observational skills, and because you may have just helped us identify someone we've been searching for." Jennifer signed the papers with a hand that shook, despite her best efforts to appear calm. Agent Chen began the briefing. The credit card used in the transaction was legitimately issued to a David Williamson who lived in Columbus, Ohio. However, the real David Williamson had died in a car accident 6 weeks earlier. His death had been reported to the credit card company, and the account had been flagged for closure. When someone attempted to use the card in Virginia, hundreds of miles from Williamson's last known location, the system automatically triggered a security alert. But this wasn't a simple case of credit card fraud. Agent Thornton continued the explanation, his voice low and serious. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had been investigating a suspected Soviet sleeper agent operating somewhere in the Washington area. These agents, known in intelligence circles as illegals, were Soviet operatives who entered the United States using false identities, sometimes assuming the names of deceased Americans. They lived seemingly normal lives for years or even decades, building credible backgrounds while waiting for activation or collecting intelligence. The man Jennifer had served matched the physical description of an individual they had been tracking for the past 8 months, following leads from a defector who had provided information about Soviet intelligence operations in North America. The defector had described an agent who had been operating in the United States since the mid-1970s, someone who had successfully integrated into American society, holding down regular employment while secretly reporting to Soviet handlers. The agent's true identity was Mikhail Sergeyevich Volkov, born in Leningrad, recruited by the KGB at age 26 while working as a chemical engineer. He had undergone extensive training in Moscow, spending 5 years learning to become perfectly American. Language instruction with native speakers, cultural immersion, studying everything from baseball statistics to popular television shows. He had been taught to think in English, to dream in English, to suppress any trace of his Russian origins. In 1976, Volkov entered the United States through Canada, using forged documents that identified him as Robert Harrison, supposedly born in Portland, Oregon. The real Robert Harrison had died of pneumonia as an infant in 1943, but his birth certificate existed in county records. Soviet intelligence excelled at finding these ghosts, deceased Americans whose identities could be resurrected and inhabited by their operatives. For the first several years, Volkov lived quietly in Seattle, working as a research assistant at a pharmaceutical company. He married an American woman who had no idea of his true background, established credit, paid taxes, became an invisible member of American society. In 1981, he relocated to the Washington area, specifically Fairfax County, taking a position as a quality control supervisor at a manufacturing plant. His proximity to the capital region was not coincidental. Agent Chen pulled out a thick file folder, spreading several documents across the table. Over the past 6 years, Volkov had been stealing trade secrets from his employer, a defense contractor that produced components for military communication systems. Nothing catastrophic by itself, but the cumulative intelligence value was significant. The Soviets gained insights into American manufacturing processes, materials science, and quality control procedures that they could apply to their own military-industrial complex. But Volkov's true mission was likely broader than industrial espionage. The KGB trained their sleeper agents to be opportunists, to exploit whatever access they could obtain. Volkov's position required him to travel occasionally to other defense facilities for quality audits, giving him exposure to multiple secure locations. He attended industry conferences, where he mingled with engineers and managers from across the defense sector. He was patient, methodical, and careful. Jennifer listened to all of this with growing amazement. The mundane transaction at her cash register had intersected with an actual spy operation, like something from the novels she enjoyed reading. Agent Thornton saw her expression and smiled slightly. "You're wondering how we connected the dots from a flagged credit card to a Soviet agent?" Jennifer nodded. Agent Chen explained the chain of logic. When David Williamson's card was used, it triggered an automatic fraud alert. However, the alert landed on the desk of an analyst who was also monitoring for unusual patterns related to the suspected Soviet operation. The analyst noticed that the transaction occurred in Fairfax County, very close to where they believed their target was operating. She decided to delay the transaction authorization and have the cashier describe the customer, just in case. It was a long shot, but intelligence work often was. When Jennifer's description closely matched their suspected agent, alarm bells went off immediately. But why, Jennifer asked, had David Williamson's credit card ended up in Volkov's hands? This was where the story became even more interesting. Agent Thornton explained that the real David Williamson had been traveling through Virginia on business about 2 months before his death. He stayed at a hotel in Arlington, just a few miles from where Volkov lived. Security camera footage from that hotel, reviewed after Williamson's credit card was flagged, showed a man matching Volkov's description in the lobby at the same time Williamson checked in. The working theory was that Volkov had somehow obtained Williamson's credit card information during that brief intersection of their lives. Perhaps a compromised card reader, perhaps a more direct theft. When Williamson died 6 weeks later in Ohio, Volkov had no way of knowing. He likely assumed the card was still active and safe to use for small purchases. Using the credit card was a rare mistake for someone as careful as Volkov. Agent Chen speculated that he might have been running low on cash and needed supplies before the predicted snowstorm. Or perhaps after more than a decade of successful deception, he had become slightly overconfident. A small slip in judgment, but combined with Jennifer's observational skills and a fortunate convergence of monitoring systems, it was enough to compromise his cover. Now that they had a confirmed sighting and knew exactly what Volkov looked like at present, the Federal Bureau of Investigation could proceed with surveillance and eventually apprehension. Jennifer's question was obvious. Would they arrest him immediately? Agent Thornton shook his head. Arresting Volkov immediately would yield one agent, but might compromise the opportunity to learn more about his network. Who were his handlers? Did he have any accomplices? What communication methods did he use? These questions were crucial for understanding the broader Soviet intelligence operation. Instead, the Federal Bureau of Investigation would place Volkov under intensive surveillance. They would watch him constantly, document his movements, identify his contacts. They would wait for him to make contact with his Soviet handlers, which would reveal more about how the KGB operated within the United States. This surveillance phase might last weeks or even months. Jennifer's role in this operation was now complete, but its significance could not be overstated. She had provided the breakthrough that allowed agents to move from suspicion to confirmation. Agent Chen emphasized how rare such opportunities were. Most intelligence work consisted of tedious document analysis and dead ends. Human intelligence, especially chance encounters like this one, remained invaluable. Jennifer was asked to maintain absolute secrecy about everything she had learned. She could not tell her family, her friends, her classmates, or her co-workers. The only people who could know were sitting in this room. If word leaked that Volkov had been identified, he would disappear immediately. The Federal Bureau of Investigation would monitor Jennifer's safety as well, though they believed the risk was minimal. Volkov had no reason to think anything was wrong with the transaction. From his perspective, there had been a brief delay, then his purchase was approved. He had left with his groceries, probably never thinking about it again. Jennifer agreed to the secrecy requirement, signing additional forms that spelled out the legal consequences of disclosure. As the agents prepared to leave, she asked one final question. Would she ever know what happened, how this all turned out? Agent Thornton smiled and promised that when the operation concluded, assuming it was safe to do so, they would inform her of the outcome. It might be months or even years, but they would not forget her contribution. Jennifer returned to her register, her mind spinning. She mechanically scanned items for the remaining hours of her shift, operating on autopilot While her thoughts raced, she had actually encountered a real Soviet spy, someone who had deceived an entire nation, living a fabricated life among unsuspecting Americans. The banality of it struck her most powerfully. He had bought laundry detergent and canned soup. He had been concerned about the weather. There were no secret codes or dramatic confrontations, just an ordinary man buying ordinary items, except nothing about him was ordinary at all. In the following weeks, Jennifer noticed an unmarked sedan that appeared occasionally in the Walmart parking lot. She never acknowledged the agents inside, but she knew they were there, watching for any sign that Volkov might return or that his associates might be monitoring her. The presence of the surveillance was both reassuring and unsettling. She went about her normal routine, attending classes, working her shifts, but carrying a secret that weighed on her consciousness. Mikhail Volkov, unaware that his entire operation had been compromised, continued his carefully constructed life. He went to work at the manufacturing plant, performed his duties competently, socialized appropriately with colleagues. He had dinner with his wife, who remained blissfully ignorant of her husband's true identity. He attended a neighborhood cookout and discussed lawn care with his neighbors. He was the perfect American suburban professional, except for the film canisters of photographed documents hidden in his basement and the shortwave radio concealed in his garage that he used to receive coded transmissions from Moscow. The Federal Bureau of Investigation surveillance teams rotated in shifts, maintaining constant observation without revealing their presence. They documented Volkov's every movement, his daily commute, his lunch routines, his weekend activities. They identified patterns in his behavior, waiting for the anomaly that would indicate contact with his handlers. On April 23, 1987, 37 days after Jennifer's chance encounter at the Walmart checkout, the surveillance finally paid dividends. Volkov left his house on a Saturday morning, telling his wife he was going to a hardware store. Instead, he drove to a park in Alexandria, a route that took him on an unnecessarily complicated path, clearly designed to detect any followers. The Federal Bureau of Investigation teams were experienced enough to maintain surveillance without being spotted, using multiple vehicles and aircraft support. At the park, Volkov retrieved a package from behind a specific tree, a classic dead drop technique used by intelligence services for decades. The package was small, probably containing money and possibly instructions from his KGB handlers. He spent exactly 17 minutes in the park, following a predetermined pattern that would allow him to scan for surveillance. Satisfied he was alone, he returned to his car and continued to the hardware store, where he actually purchased items, maintaining his cover story. The Federal Bureau of Investigation agents photographed the entire sequence. More importantly, they left surveillance equipment near the dead drop location and identified the individual who had placed the package there. This person led them to another Soviet operative, this one working under diplomatic cover at the Soviet embassy. The network was beginning to reveal itself. Over the next 3 months, the surveillance operation expanded dramatically. The Federal Bureau of Investigation identified 4 additional individuals connected to Volkov's spy ring, including another suspected illegal agent operating in Baltimore and 2 Soviet diplomats who served as handlers and communications links. The Bureau faced a delicate decision. They could continue surveillance indefinitely, gathering more intelligence about Soviet operations, or they could move to arrest the network before something went wrong and the suspects disappeared. The choice was made in July when intelligence from another source indicated that the KGB might be planning to extract Volkov from the United States. His cover might have been compromised through channels unrelated to Jennifer's encounter, or Moscow might simply be rotating him out after more than a decade of service. On July 16, 1987, at approximately 6 in the morning, Federal Bureau of Investigation agents executed simultaneous raids at multiple locations across Virginia and Maryland. Mikhail Volkov was arrested at his home in Fairfax County, along with his wife, who was later determined to be an unwitting dupe of the operation and was not charged. The Baltimore illegal was apprehended at his apartment. The 2 Soviet diplomats, protected by diplomatic immunity, were declared persona non grata and expelled from the United States within 48 hours. At Volkov's residence, agents discovered an impressive collection of espionage equipment: miniature cameras for photographing documents, one-time cipher pads for encoding messages, invisible ink, fake identification documents, and $73,000 in cash hidden in a false wall panel. His basement contained a small darkroom for developing film and a sophisticated radio setup for receiving instructions from Moscow. Most damning were the thousands of photographs of classified and proprietary documents from his employer, representing years of systematic theft of American industrial and military secrets. During interrogation, Volkov initially claimed to be Robert Harrison and insisted the agents had made a terrible mistake. However, confronted with evidence from the Soviet defector and his own espionage equipment, he eventually acknowledged his true identity. He was Mikhail Sergeyevich Volkov, a KGB officer operating under deep cover for the past 11 years. His wife, when informed of her husband's true identity, was devastated. She had married him believing he was a loyal American citizen. She had 2 children with him, built a life with him, and none of it was real. Her husband was a Soviet spy who had deceived her completely. The psychological trauma was profound. She had to grapple with the realization that her entire marriage was a lie, that the man she loved did not actually exist. Federal authorities provided her with counseling and legal protection, assuring her that she was a victim of Volkov's deception. The arrest made headlines across the country, though specific details were withheld for national security reasons. News reports described the capture of a Soviet spy ring operating in the Washington area, but did not mention how the investigation had begun or the role that a Walmart cashier had played in identifying the primary suspect. The public narrative focused on excellent intelligence work and international cooperation, which was true but incomplete. Behind the scenes, Federal Bureau of Investigation officials discussed Jennifer Martinez's contribution in glowing terms. An internal memorandum commended her observational skills and judgment, noting that her attention to subtle details had been instrumental in confirming the suspect's identity. There was discussion about offering her employment with the Federal Bureau of Investigation once she completed her education, recognizing that her natural aptitude for investigation was exactly what the Bureau needed. In October 1987, 7 months after her chance encounter with Mikhail Volkov, Jennifer received a phone call from Agent Robert Thornton. He asked if she could come to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Washington field office for a meeting. Jennifer agreed immediately, curious about what had happened since that snowy evening in March. At the field office, Agents Thornton and Chen briefed Jennifer on the entire operation. They showed her photographs from the surveillance, explained how the network had been mapped and dismantled, described Volkov's equipment and methods. Jennifer listened with fascination, seeing how her small piece fit into the larger puzzle. Agent Chen told her something that surprised and moved her. "Jennifer, you prevented potentially years of additional intelligence theft. The documents Volkov was photographing contained information about communication systems that are critical to national defense. By identifying him when you did, you stopped that hemorrhage. Beyond that, the information we gathered from surveilling Volkov and his network has given us insights into Soviet intelligence methods that will help protect against future operations." Agent Thornton added that Mikhail Volkov would be prosecuted for espionage and face decades in prison. The diplomatic pressure on the Soviet Union regarding their intelligence activities in the United States had intensified as a result of this case. There was even discussion of a potential prisoner exchange, trading Volkov and the Baltimore illegal for American citizens held by the Soviets, though such negotiations were complex and might take years. Jennifer asked about Volkov's wife and children. Agent Chen's expression softened. "They're rebuilding their lives. The government has provided support and they've relocated to start fresh. It's incredibly difficult for them. The children are old enough to understand what happened, and they're grappling with the knowledge that their father was living a lie. Family services and counseling are involved. It's a tragic aspect of espionage that the families of agents often become collateral damage." Before Jennifer left, Agent Thornton presented her with a letter of commendation from the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, acknowledging her service to her country. The letter could not be made public, but it was a formal recognition of her contribution. He also renewed the offer to consider joining the Federal Bureau of Investigation after completing her education. The Bureau needed people with her observational skills and instincts. Jennifer accepted the letter with gratitude and promised to seriously consider the employment offer. As she drove home, she reflected on the bizarre trajectory of the past 7 months. She had gone to work expecting an ordinary shift, and instead had stumbled into the shadow world of espionage. She thought about Mikhail Volkov, a man who had lived a fabricated existence for more than a decade, perpetually pretending to be someone he was not. What kind of psychological toll did that take? How did someone maintain such a deception day after day, year after year? She thought about the subtle clues that had alerted her instincts. The microscopic hesitation in speech patterns, the unusual calluses on his hands, the watch worn on the wrong wrist. Individually, these details meant nothing. Collectively, they created a pattern that her trained observation had detected, even before her conscious mind understood what she was seeing. This was the art of intelligence work, finding meaning in seemingly random data points, trusting intuition when logic alone provided no answers. Jennifer also reflected on the broader implications of sleeper agents living among ordinary Americans. How many others were out there living false lives, stealing secrets, reporting to foreign governments? The Federal Bureau of Investigation had identified and stopped this network, but Soviet intelligence was vast and sophisticated. For every Mikhail Volkov who was caught, how many remained undetected? The Cold War might appear to be winding down in public perception, with glasnost and perestroika suggesting a thaw in Soviet-American relations. But clearly the intelligence conflict continued unabated beneath the surface. Jennifer's experience had given her a window into this hidden battlefield where the combatants wore business suits and shopped at Walmart, where the weapons were cameras and coded messages rather than missiles and bombs. In many ways, this invisible war was more insidious because it took place within American society itself, exploiting the openness and trust that characterized democratic life. Sleeper agents like Volkov took advantage of American freedoms to undermine American security, a deeply cynical operation that treated an entire nation as enemy territory, to be infiltrated and exploited. Jennifer completed her associate degree in criminal justice in spring of 1988 and immediately applied to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Her application included the confidential letter of commendation from the director, which undoubtedly helped. She was accepted into the training program and spent several months at the Federal Bureau of Investigation Academy in Quantico, Virginia, learning the formal skills of investigation, surveillance, interrogation, and analysis. She proved to be an exceptional student, and her instructors noted the same qualities that had served her so well as a Walmart cashier: attention to detail, pattern recognition, and sound judgment under pressure. After completing her training, Jennifer was assigned to the Washington field office, working in counterintelligence. It was a natural fit given her background and her demonstrated ability to identify foreign operatives. Over the following years, she worked on numerous cases involving espionage, foreign intelligence activities, and national security investigations. The Volkov case remained a touchstone throughout her career. She sometimes used it as a teaching example when training new agents, illustrating how chance encounters and alert citizens could be crucial to intelligence work. She emphasized that espionage was not just about dramatic confrontations and sophisticated technology. Sometimes it came down to a cashier who noticed that something was slightly off, who trusted her instincts enough to pay attention when a credit card transaction took longer than usual, who remembered details that most people would overlook. The case also served as a reminder of the human costs of espionage. Volkov's wife and children were innocent victims of his deception. They had to rebuild their identities and lives after learning that their husband and father was a foreign spy. Jennifer thought about them often, hoping they had found some peace and normalcy. Mikhail Volkov himself was convicted of espionage in 1989 and sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. The trial revealed extensive details about his intelligence activities and the information he had stolen. Defense experts testified that his theft of industrial secrets had set back Soviet technology development by years because the Soviets were relying on stolen information rather than developing their own innovations. In a strange irony, Volkov's espionage might have actually weakened Soviet competitiveness in the long run. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, ending the Cold War that had defined global politics for more than 4 decades. The KGB was disbanded, its functions divided among new Russian intelligence services. Many former KGB officers found themselves adrift in the new political landscape, their Cold War missions suddenly irrelevant. There was discussion of prisoner exchanges with the new Russian government, and in 1993, Mikhail Volkov was included in a trade. He was released from American custody and returned to Russia after serving only 4 years of his sentence. Jennifer learned about the exchange through official channels and had mixed feelings. From a diplomatic perspective, such trades made sense. They allowed both nations to recover their citizens and intelligence personnel, but it meant that Volkov would not serve his full sentence, would not fully answer for the betrayal of the trust that Americans had placed in him. He had stolen not just documents, but pieces of his wife's life, his children's childhoods, the goodwill of neighbors and colleagues who had considered him a friend. In Russia, Volkov disappeared from public view. Unlike some former Soviet spies who wrote memoirs or gave interviews, he maintained silence about his years in America. Perhaps he wanted to forget the person he had pretended to be. Perhaps the psychological toll of living a double life for so long had left scars that made reflection too painful. Or perhaps Russian intelligence services had instructed him to remain quiet, protecting sources and methods that might still be operational. Jennifer's career in the Federal Bureau of Investigation spanned more than 2 decades. She rose through the ranks, eventually becoming a supervisory special agent in the Counterintelligence Division. She worked cases involving Chinese espionage, Russian intelligence operations that continued after the Cold War, and emerging threats from cyber espionage. The tradecraft evolved with technology, but fundamental principles remained constant. Foreign intelligence services still sought to place agents within American society, still tried to steal secrets, still exploited human vulnerabilities. In 2008, Jennifer was invited to speak at a conference on counterintelligence. During her presentation, she discussed the Volkov case without naming specific individuals, focusing on the lessons it provided about vigilance, observation, and the importance of citizens being alert to unusual patterns. After her presentation, a young analyst approached her with questions about how to develop better observational skills. Jennifer shared the techniques she had learned over her career, emphasizing practice and mindfulness. "You have to train yourself to notice details that others overlook," she explained. "When you interact with people, pay attention to inconsistencies. Does their story make sense? Do their mannerisms match their claimed background? Are there small details that don't fit the larger picture? Most of the time, these inconsistencies are meaningless. People are complicated and contradictory, but occasionally they point to something significant. Trust your instincts, but verify with facts. The key is finding the balance between paranoia and complacency." Jennifer retired from the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 2012 after 24 years of service. She had earned numerous commendations and awards, had worked cases that resulted in the prosecution of foreign agents and the disruption of intelligence operations, had mentored dozens of younger agents who would carry on the work. But the case that had started her career, the chance encounter with a Soviet spy buying groceries at Walmart, remained the most memorable. It was a reminder that history often turned on small moments, random intersections of lives that created ripples far beyond their immediate circumstances. If Jennifer had not been working that register on that evening, if she had not noticed the subtle irregularities in the customer's behavior, if the credit card authorization system had not flagged the transaction, Mikhail Volkov might have continued his espionage for several more years. Instead, a confluence of chance and preparedness led to his identification and the dismantling of his network. After retirement, Jennifer occasionally gave talks at colleges and law enforcement conferences, sharing her experiences and encouraging young people to consider careers in intelligence and national security. She stressed that such work required patience, integrity, attention to detail, and a commitment to protecting democratic values without betraying them in the process. The balance was delicate. requiring constant ethical vigilance. In 2016, nearly 30 years after the Volkov case, Jennifer received an unexpected letter forwarded through Federal Bureau of Investigation channels. It was from one of Volkov's children, now an adult with a family of their own. The letter was difficult to read, filled with complex emotions. The writer acknowledged the pain and confusion of learning about their father's true identity, but thanked Jennifer for her role in stopping his espionage activities. The writer expressed understanding that Volkov's actions had endangered national security and appreciation for the agents who had handled the case professionally, minimizing harm to the innocent family members. Jennifer was deeply moved by the letter. It represented a kind of closure, an acknowledgement from someone who had been caught in the machinery of espionage that justice and compassion could coexist. She wrote a careful response, expressing empathy for the challenges the family had faced and wishing them peace and happiness. She did not know if her response ever reached its intended recipient, but she hoped it provided some small comfort. The Volkov case became part of Federal Bureau of Investigation training materials, anonymized and stripped of identifying details, but preserved as an instructional example. New agents learned about the importance of citizen vigilance, the value of trusting trained instincts, and the necessity of thorough follow-up on anomalous information. The case illustrated how modern intelligence work combined human intuition with technological systems, creating layers of detection that could catch even carefully trained operatives. Looking back across the decades, Jennifer recognized that her contribution had been both significant and remarkably simple. She had noticed that something was wrong. She had paid attention to that feeling rather than dismissing it. She had followed procedures and cooperated with authorities. These were not extraordinary actions, yet their consequences had been substantial. It made her wonder how many other ordinary citizens had similar moments, brief intersections with hidden worlds of espionage and intelligence, without ever realizing the significance of what they had witnessed. The Cold War produced countless such moments, thousands of small encounters that collectively shaped the course of that long ideological struggle. Cashiers and taxi drivers, bartenders and hotel clerks, librarians and postal workers who noticed things that seemed slightly wrong, who reported suspicious activities, who provided fragments of information that intelligence analysts could piece together into actionable intelligence. The visible heroes of the Cold War were political leaders and military commanders, but the invisible heroes were ordinary people doing ordinary jobs with extraordinary attention and civic consciousness. Jennifer Martinez had been one such person. She had been a 23-year-old community college student working at Walmart to pay for her education. She had dreams of joining the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but no expectation that her future would begin with a credit card transaction on a snowy March evening. Yet that is exactly what happened. A Soviet sleeper agent buying laundry detergent intersected with a cashier who noticed that his speech patterns were subtly wrong, and history pivoted on that intersection. The story raises questions about identity and deception that extend beyond espionage. Mikhail Volkov had lived as Robert Harrison for more than a decade. He had formed relationships, built a career, created a family. Were those experiences entirely false? Could someone maintain such a comprehensive deception without some part of it becoming genuine? Did Volkov love his American wife, or was that relationship purely instrumental? Did he care about his children, or were they simply elements of his cover story? These questions have no easy answers. Human psychology is complex, and people are capable of compartmentalizing contradictory realities. Volkov might have genuinely cared for his family while simultaneously betraying them and his adopted country. The capacity for such contradictions is both fascinating and disturbing, revealing depths of human nature that resist simple moral categorization. For Jennifer, the lasting lesson was about vigilance without paranoia. Democratic societies depend on openness and trust. Citizens need to be able to interact freely, without constant suspicion. Yet that very openness creates vulnerabilities that hostile intelligence services exploit. The challenge is maintaining security without sacrificing the freedoms that make democratic life worthwhile. It is a permanent tension with no perfect resolution, only constant negotiation and careful judgment. The Volkov case demonstrated that security does not require turning society into a surveillance state. It requires alert, trained citizens who understand that paying attention to their surroundings and reporting genuine concerns is a civic duty. Jennifer had not spied on her customers or invaded anyone's privacy. She had simply noticed inconsistencies during a routine transaction and followed appropriate procedures. That measured response, neither paranoid nor complacent, represented the ideal balance. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories and check out the video on screen. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. See you next time.